our first speaker is Kleng Yu Julve. She is the current International Linkages Officer of AGHAM. Previously, Kleng was a leader in the training of and community education staff in the Center for Educational Concerns in the Philippines. She's a forestry major from the University of the Philippines in Los Baños. And apart from being an international leader with AGHAM, Kleng is also a placard, sign, and sticker maker with the organization Artista para sa AGHAM, Teknolohiya at Kalikasan, or Art Attack. Kleng likes biking or cycling and is also a proud mother of 6. She has 5 cats and a dog. All right, the second speaker, we have Chucky Calzado, is a newly elected national chairperson of AGHAM and a high school teacher at the Philippine Science High School with a specialization in bioethics education. He earned his Master's of Arts in Education in Environmental Education from University of the Philippines, Diliman, and a Master of Bioethics from Monash University. Currently, Chucky is pursuing his PhD at the University of College London Institute of Education with a focus on post-colonial theory, critical pedagogy, and bioethics education. So let's all give Kleng and Chucky a virtual round of applause. Kleng, please. Yeah. Kleng, please take it away.
Hi, good evening, good morning to everyone. We have, I think, at least 3 time zones here. That sometimes I wish that the Earth is flat, so we don't have the we don't have the time zones, and we will not compute for the time differences. So it happens to me all the time. Sometimes I miss important meetings. So anyway, thank you for inviting us, AFSA, and thank you for attending. Thank you everyone for waking up in the morning or keeping up all night to join our discussion. Again, I'm Kleng Julve. I'm the International Linkages Officer of AGHAM, Advocates of Science and Technology for the People. It's an organization of progressive scientists, engineers, and advocates who are bound together by the common interest of making science and technology serve the people. So we are not the party list. May kapangalan kasi kami, but it's it's not us, no. So thank you for the introduction, Cynthia, and welcome to our discussion. The Philippine situation through a scientific lens. Na ang catch nga ay no vax, no ride, ATL at Dolomite. Kumusta na ba sa Pilipinas? Sino dito ang galing sa Pinas recently and got a chance to experience the pandemic in the Philippines? Anyone? We have friends here from AGHAM and different organizations na nasa Pilipinas. Ayan, so may mga nagtataas ng kamay. So mamaya mas madidiscuss. So maybe you could share your your experiences, no? Not just in the Philippines but also in the US, no? Kung may parallelism ang ating experiences. So feel free to join the discussion. You can use the emoji and type your thoughts in the comment section, no? So that you can join the discussion. And today we're going to talk about the current ganap in the Philippines, from Hiwalay, Mel and Chris Aquino, Char, absurd policies, constantly changing quarantine restrictions, to environmental laws, human rights, and others. It's kind of a broad topic that actually masyado siyang malawak, no? But we'll try to focus on some major points. So here's the discussion flow. So discussion flow, we have 6 main topics. I will discuss the first 4, the Duterte's legacy and worsening economic crisis, intensified political repression and terror. The 4th is, of course, the people's response and resistance. No? And Chucky will discuss the ways forward, particularly on propagating the culture of science, and Jonah will discuss the STEAM PH, or the Scientists, Technologists, and Engineers Agenda for the Masses. So let's start, no? First is Duterte's legacy. AGHAM briefly summarize the highlights of Duterte's policies on S&T. Focusing on pandemic response, actually there's 5 major points here. Pandemic response, environmental protection, rehabilitation, STEM workers' welfare, STEM education and research and development, and last is agriculture. So we've gathered some insights. Aside from analyzing Duterte's policies on this, we've also gathered some insights from STEM professionals through a survey that we conducted last July. This is for guess based on the title. So first on Duterte's COVID-19 pandemic response. Maybe you've already attended a lot of discussions or webinars on this. So I'll just pick up some key points in his pandemic response. So as the country continues to be ravaged by COVID-19 pandemic for actually almost 2 years na now. But sadly, the Duterte government still has to put in place policy recommendations pushed by many sectors, including health and science experts, na nung hinapag na during the first months of the pandemic. But sadly, he did not listen. And until now, Duterte did not heed calls for free mass testing, more efficient contact tracing, faster vaccine rollout, and production of test kits and vaccines. As you could see, here in the DOH data, the daily tests is below 100,000. Napakababa ng testing natin, which is around 43,874, and the positivity rate remains way above 5%, which is 37.2. Actually, it was a bit higher a few days ago. Umabot siya ng 46 to 49%, no? Almost 1 in 2 na nagpa-test ay positive, no? And COVID-19 deaths remains COVID-19 death tolls, according to reports, are quite low, but there has been some discrepancies with the data from the PSA. So until now, our problem with the inaccessibility of vaccine, na very mabagal na vaccine rollout, especially in the countryside. So there's still problem regarding mass testing, contact tracing, which which are just gathering our data. Most of the times, a lot of people say that after filling out the contact tracing form, nakaka-receive sila ng scam messages, no? So it's not really that effective. And sadly, we have the world-renowned plastic barriers, no, as part of the worst pandemic response. And we have overwhelmed and underpaid health workers. Actually, some of them have not yet received the special risk allowance. One of the doctor even received around 2,000 pesos for the 6-month worth of her work, no? So, ganun kalala, no? And one thing that you could see in this administration is the deliberate and conscious miscommunication. Matampok siya, no? From mass testing. They, even in the early part of the pandemic, in around April 2020, scientists and health professionals and even other different organizations have already made it clear what mass testing is. It's not testing everyone, but they keep on saying, no, we can test everyone. It's very ang tawag nito, expensive, no? So we still have constantly changing restrictions, quarantine restrictions. We have ECQ, GCQ, MECQ, restrictions, tiny bubbles with heightened restrictions, whatever, and it changes from time to time, no? Walang malawak or matagal na vision, no? So some are even saying that Omicron is a blessing, no, because it will help boost our immunity, no, against the disease. And there are anti-people, anti-poor policies, and the Duterte administration treats COVID public health crisis as just a mere peace and order issue. So you can see that in the policies such as no vax, no ride in early 2020, we have witnessed a lot of quarantine violators being jailed, and even Duterte said that shoot them dead. He ordered troops to kill quarantine violators. So, yun. So that's the gist of his pandemic response, no? Na he ignores science and he resorts to arrogance, in short. And now let's move on to the environmental protection and rehabilitation. You can prompt me if you're chatting because I can see. I check na lang, baka may nag-ano. Ayan. Okay, yeah. DOH is the Department of Health in the Philippines, no? So, ayan. And let's move on to environmental protection and rehabilitation. So first is the surrender of marine and energy resources in the Philippines, in the West Philippine Sea, sorry. So as we notice the aggression of Chinese vessels, sorry, in the West Philippine Sea, the aggression has increased during the Duterte's reign, even with the 2016 win of the Philippines at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Kumbaga, he treated it as just, piece of paper. It's just a piece of paper. It means nothing. At dahil doon, no, tumindi yung aggression sa West Philippine Sea. And we could see the Duterte's subservience to China, because China till now has continued to loot and destroy marine life in the West Philippine Sea, and ocean filling and reclamation still continues at different islands in the West Philippine Sea, the disputed territories there. We have a lot of reefs there which belongs to the Philippines, but they keep on claiming it as part of the 9-dash line. And there's still oil. They also continue to explore oil in the area. And very apparent is the bullying and the harassment of Pinoy fisher folks, and not just fisher folks, even scientists. Sorry. Sorry. According to a UP Associate Professor, Dr. Onda, they've experienced the UPMSI team doing research in West Philippine Sea have experienced harassment in 2021. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, it's 2021. No? So nakakalungkot, and ito very fresh pa yung news. It just happened last night, I guess. Kung nasa Pilipinas ka, na may bago na namang intimidation and harassment at the West Philippine Sea. Okay. So next, so that's for the Okay. And next is continued environmental plunder in favor of big businesses. So there's the total wholesale of the country's natural resources to the highest bidder. So there are huge projects such as the reclamation in Bulacan, Aerotropolis, Manila Bay. Yeah, it's part of the Manila Bay. Actually, the Ramon Ang is planning to put up a 2,500 hectare aerotropolis in Bulacan. It's part of the Manila Bay, and it will displace fisher folks there, who rely on those marine resources for a living. And also, they will be destroying a lot of mangroves in the area. Actually, as you can see in the photo, in the upper right, yeah, they already did. They already cut down those mangroves. As we all know, mangroves take some time to grow. And we went to the area. Some even have 25 to 30 dBH na pinutol, no? So that's the problem. And actually also Duterte signed EO 130. It intensified mining liberalization in the Philippines. So EO 130 was issued on April 14, 2021, and it amends former President Aquino's EO 79, which grants permission to the government to enter into new mineral agreements, because EO 79 is technically the mining ban. But Duterte said, no, we need money, so let's reopen new applications for mining. So that's really, really sad for the mining communities who've been ravaged by these large corporations. And recently, there's the land grabbing and proposed land grabbing of the Patoman Cove. It's part of the Palay-Palay Mataas na Gulod protected landscape in Cavite, where the fisher folks have been living in the area for more than several decades. But this again, this oligarch, the Virata Sea, are displacing these people. So we also have the very, very famous Manila Bay Rehabilitation, or the Manila Bay Beach Nourishment Project, which is actually the very famous white sand, no? In the time of the pandemic. Actually, they said that Duterte said that the white sand in the Manila Bay is very good for our mental health daw. But what we need during the pandemic is not sand. It's not fake sand, no? From which has been mined from Cebu, no? Ang kailangan natin ay mass testing, contact tracing, at beefing up the healthcare system. But what they offered is this fake white sand, no, na nauubos na rin naman. So it's literally putting money in the ocean. So ganun siya kalala. So let's move on. Okay, let's move on the STEM workers' welfare. So under this section, STEM workers are underappreciated. And there's also the issue of brain drain. No? These two are all connected. Okay. So, we have issues of pay delays, and we have issues of pay delays, no? For example, credits to the STEM Alliance of UP Diliman. They are an alliance of STEM workers in UP Diliman. All of them are contractuals, non-UP contractuals to be specific, even if they're part of the institutions in UP, no, in University of the Philippines, Diliman. Not just in Diliman, but in different areas, but in different SUCs, or state universities and colleges. They've reported that some of them have not received their salaries for more than a year. So imagine that. Imagine the life of Filipino scientists, no? So kumbaga ano talaga siya, literal na serve the people. There's a placard there, tuloy ang field work kahit may pandemya, sana ang sahod din. It's really a sad situation for our STEM workers, no? And actually, in relation to brain drain, as you could see nga na underappreciated yung STEM workers natin sa Pilipinas, we could not blame scientists who seek better pastures abroad, no? Pinoy's ranked actually third among highly educated migrants in OECD countries. OECD stands for Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's composed of 38 developed countries, including EU, America, etc. So around half of Filipino migrants in the OECD chose the United States, forming one of the most important migration corridors identified by the OECD, according to the OECD report on Feb 2020. As you could see, no, here in the graph, maliit lang yung Pilipinas in reference to India and China. Pero pangatlo tayo. We have 1.89 million highly educated migrants in these OECD countries. So it's logical because there's no national industries in the Philippines. So there's lack of opportunities. Aanihin mo yung highly specialized skills mo. Sadly, kung wala namang maayos na opportunities because we don't have the basic industries, no? But we have showbiz industry. Okay, joke. So also, Duterte created the OFW department recently in 2021. So it's the Department of Migrant Workers, kung hindi ako kakamali, no? Which somewhat institutionalizes Philippines' reliance on labor export. Kumbaga parang nag-create ka ulit ng panibagong, may benefits siya, okay, para ma-streamline yung mga agencies relating to migrant workers. But still, it's kumbaga parang nag-create ka ng panibagong bugaw para palabasin yung labor from the Philippines to abroad. So it's quite sad because it's part of its mandate, no, to yon. Okay, sorry. And the problem of brain drain actually is not new. Sorry. Wait lang po. Yeah. So, okay na? Yeah. The problem of brain drain actually is not new, no? Even former Secretary Pernia already published a study on this in 1976 pa, na to quote, among Asian countries, India stood out as the leading supplier or loser of engineers and scientists in the 60s and Philippines of physicians and surgeons during the decade of the 60s. So another study by J.L. Lu analyzing the data of engineering and ICT professionals deployed abroad. You could notice the increasing trend from 2000 to 2009, even before Duterte. So it's not just Duterte, but the problem is systemic. As what we've identified earlier, there's the lack of national industries, lack of opportunities for our professional workers. So let's move on to the on STEM, education and R&D. Medyo madami siya, no? Okay. So on STEM education and R&D, we've just picked up some points, no? First is the according to the research conducted by AGHAM educators in 2021. There's this problem, one of the most common problem, yung shortage of classrooms and laboratories, no, infrastructurally. There are 113,995 classrooms lacking, no? Around 50,000 lang are completed in 2020. And in terms of science laboratories, we only have 1 in 10 schools on average. Diba? So, kumbaga, ang lang din to, paano ka matututo if the infrastructures are not there, no? So, in terms of according to DOST SEI and UPNISMED in 2011, the lack of instructional materials and equipment in schools has been used to account for the poor performance of students. So that's about the STEM education. And here are some stats here. Um, Thank you for Art Attack for making this cutouts, no? Um, in terms of gross domestic expenditures in R&D, according to the UNESCO standard, developing countries such as the Philippines should allot at least 1% of its GDP to research and development. But Philippines only allotted 0.16% of its GDP for R&D. Okay. So, ayan, no. So, and in terms of R&D personnel, we only have 141 per million population compared to the UN standard of 380. So, yun. And last but not the least, on this part is the Duterte's legacy on agriculture. So, as you could see, kahit photos lang sila, no, the agriculture remains backward and weak. There's still manual agriculture, as you can see in the photo. Parang sobrang laking irony, no, that in 1200 BC they were using animals to plow the lot, but now it's still happening in the Philippines. There's manual and backward labor in agriculture, and there's the highlight of this Duterte administration is the rice liberalization, which kills local farmers with the influx of cheaper imports. And we have very low budget on agriculture, only 72 billion for DA and 12.8 billion for DAR, versus the combined budget of DND and DILG, which amounts to 412 billion pesos for 2022. So you can see, no, that the budget is really misallocated for so yon. And so the second part is the worsening economic crisis. Let's take a look at the Philippine economy. Most of the data here are from the freshest bird talk of the progressive think tank Ibon Foundation, which happened yesterday. No? So first, see the graph. We have the weakest economy in post-war era. So in pre-pandemic, economy is already slowing every year despite increase in BBB, because BBB, or the Build is the flagship project of this administration. So things were bad before lockdowns. It just got worse. So you can see that manufacturing is collapsing and agriculture is at its lowest, no? And the Duterte admin claims that there's the economy boost in the fourth quarter of 2021. There's the strengthening of peso, exports, more foreign direct investments. But they don't mean anything to the people, no? Kasi the people's lives aren't getting better. So we have the worst unemployment in Philippine history. Lowest job generation figure post-martial law. We only have over 300,000 on average from 2017 to 2019. But in terms of BBB, again, the flagship project of this government, it only created 23% increase in construction jobs, which are not permanent. Since if they're done, there's no more jobs, no? So, and we are also record holder in Asean. We have the biggest GDP contraction, biggest manufacturing decline, as you can see here, negative 0.8, biggest unemployment, and highest inflation. And there's widening wealth gap and ballooning debt. The poor and vulnerable Filipinos are around 21 million out of 110 million. So could you imagine that? And the poorest 70% lost around 13 to 32,500 due to the lockdowns in the past 17 months. So sabi nga, no, those who have, nasaid na yung savings and we're just one sickness away from poverty, kahit na meron kang regular job. And the wage gap between the living wage. The living wage is the decent wage that you need to live decently, is 528 pesos, no? Because in NCR, the minimum wage is just around 537. So could you imagine how could you live with that kind of minimum wage, no? And there's insufficient ayuda for the needy, as you can see in the graph. No, there's Bayanihan 1 and 2, which provides ayuda, supposedly aid, relief for the Filipino people. But as you can see, even if the unemployment is still high, there's no ayuda available. So there are 3.8 million unemployed Filipinos in June 2021, but the ayuda is just 515 million. But in July, it's none. It's zero. It's zero, diba? So, as we've said, there's insufficient ayuda for the needy, yet there are greater tax cuts for the rich. There's this Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentive Enterprises, or CREATE Act, which cuts down tax from 30% to 20 or 25%, depending on how big the company is. So, ang saklap lang, no? According to this, the 2,919 Filipino billionaires are worth 8.1 trillion, which is 16% already of the nation's wealth. So a tiny wealth tax on this will contribute to around 467 billion to government revenues. But the government choose to forgo those taxes in favor of those big businesses, no? So, ang nakakalungkot lang, no? Everyone got hurt. It's pandemic. But okay lang. Sabi nga ng executive director ng Ibon Foundation na si Sunny Africa, lahat ay tinamaan ng pandemya, pero hindi lahat tinamaan ng Duterte. That's the difference. Because our ASEAN neighbors are able to, ayun, di ba, na makabangon. But what should have we done, no? We should have early closed our borders. We should have tested, traced, isolated better, basic na bagay. But according to this government, maybe the imposing lockdowns are quite cheaper without laying down the basic infrastructure for that, such as aids and beefing up the healthcare systems. But still, they go for lockdowns. Okay. So, of course, the people have voiced out what we really need. Actually, right now, it's okay. Right now, what we need is cash assistance to the needy and small entrepreneurs rather than corporate tax cuts. The money is there. There's calamity fund. The government can also suspend train oil taxes, which will, which will really help in lowering the prices of goods, no? And so, and among other stuff, no? So next, in this third part, actually part of this regime's legacy is the intensified political repression and terror. There's this Duterte's crimes against humanity, no? Duterte's bloody war on drugs resulted to around 6,000 individuals killed. And yeah. And the International Criminal Court already agreed to open a formal investigation into his crimes committed against humanity, no? During his term between 2016 to 2019 and other extrajudicial executions. And actually, Philippines is the second deadliest country for environmental defenders. There are 43 environmental defenders killed in 2019, no? And sadly, these environmental defenders protect almost 1.2 million hectares of across the Philippines. So most of them are indigenous peoples, peasants, farmers, no? And we have the highest agribusiness linked attacks. So, ayan, there's also criminalization of and threats from new draconian legislation increases the risk for activists, specifically the anti-terror law. And next, there's this the regime criminalizes dissent. So if you're familiar with the ATL or anti-terror law, it's technically war against everyone, not just activists and dissenters. So there were also series of raids and arrests in progressive organizations' offices. And according to Karapatan, Karapatan is an organization of human rights defenders, human rights activists. There's 1,126 activists and grassroots organizers arrested and killed, no? And the red tagging of IATF in this government is actually a death sentence to activists. And IATF is the Interagency Task. Sorry, it's the little. It's NTF-LCAC. I'm so sorry. it got mixed up. So NTF-LCAC is the National Task Force to End Local Communist insurgencies, if I'm not mistaken. So they really have a huge budget, and what they do is red tag everyone, which is actually a death sentence specifically to activists. We're witness to that, what happened to Precious Zara and a lot of activists, no, and even journalists are being silenced or harassed for covering abuses and corruption. So, medyo nakakalungkot. It's quite yeah, thank you for correcting that. It's NTF-LCAC. I'm so sorry. Nakakalungkot, but still, we could see that the people are rising. There's people's response and resistance, no? What we could see is the hope, the glimmer of hope. Wow. Through the collective action of the people. So, I've listed down some responses here, from fighting misinformation or disinformation. We have information campaign early on in the pandemic because there are no available information specifically for the grassroots regarding the pandemic. Some communities are not even aware that there's a pandemic going on, and they are not even aware what it's the difference, no? So there are a lot of initiatives here, and there's community action in serving the people. So there are different initiatives, from lockdown lab, providing support to the healthcare workers, and providing relief. And we've witnessed the power of the community pantry, no? Different initiatives by the people, especially during the part where the government imposed another lockdowns without giving aid to the people. So that's why the people initiated this community pantries, and it spread like wildfire. And up to collectively standing up for the people's rights. From the parliament, different policies are being pushed to the parliament of the streets, no, online and offline. So maybe Chucky can discuss further about this, and basically that ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, so I guess now we'll hear from Chucky.
Hello.
There's an echo.
Yeah, hello. Yeah. So this would be short in terms of ways forward. So we've seen a lot of what the regime has done in the Philippines, right? The unscientific response to the pandemic. It stems from a backward society wherein we are at the hands of different imperialist countries, from US to China to other countries. So now the question is, how do we actually address these problems, right? Where we can see that there are some scientific responses to the pandemic, but the question is, what are we actually doing with the data, right? So uh, the pandemic actually exposed the following: at the hands of the few ruling elite, S&P will not serve the masses. So we've seen how the Department of Health, the the regime as a whole, use S&P just to serve their own needs, right? Not the needs of the people, in terms of mass testing, in terms of, let's say, the UP and its scientists actually develop a testing kit for an antigen testing kit at the start of the pandemic. But the government did not use that, right? So they did not roll that out. So even now, we are just, I think there are just 2 antigen kits that have been accepted by FDA. So as we can see, at the hands of the few ruling elites, science and technology will not serve the masses. And then S&T should not be monopolized, rather it should be democratized. So in terms of expertise, how can we actually um, channel? How can we actually educate the people? How can we, especially us scientists, how can we go down from our pedestal and then talk to the masses, educate them, maximize their knowledge? It's not as if the masses do not have their own knowledge system, right? It's up to us. We should help them actually maximizing their understanding of their material condition. The difference actually is, how can we bridge the gap between the data and their belief system? It's not actually just their belief system, also our belief system. So for example, when we were young, we just accepted vaccines, right? We don't actually know the science behind vaccines, but now we push the use of vaccines because of our scientific background about vaccines. But the question for us is, how do we connect the gap between data and belief? It's the belief system that actually pushes people. It's not data. And if scientists actually just stay within the confines of data, of science, and not translating that data into the belief of people, I think science will not move forward. Okay. And if you're familiar with this picture of an enraged vendor, when the regime pushes the push the no vaccine no ride policy, just I think last week, you can see from I think you can search that on Facebook or on YouTube. You can actually find some data in the language that was used by the vendor. It might be lacking of data, but you can actually see how her her belief system actually what's happening so her belief system is actually, and the data that is being that she's actually getting from different sources are not actually okay.
Zoom bomber.
They're not actually meeting, right? So there's this, her belief, and the unscientific data that she has, no? So nagkukulang no? So we can actually address that problem by bridging the gap. Okay. So, and for the last slide.
Here.
Sorry, technical issue. And how can we actually address that? We have to decolonize S&T that directly confronts its imperialist roots and nature. We cannot just accept S&T as it is, right? We cannot just accept S&T as a truth. We have to directly confront its imperialist roots and nature. We have to start questioning the scientific method. Why is it acceptable truth, right? So when we teach science, when we teach physics, when we teach gravity, when we teach cell, right? So we have to know, we have to be able to teach the whys, the hows, the when, the where, everything of it. We cannot just accept that it's true. Okay. So and also there should be an uptake of a culture of science. We cannot just talk about national industrialization. We cannot just talk about agrarian reform, how national industrialization helps agrarian reform, how we can, through in national industrialization, increases our capacity for vaccine development, etc., etc. There should be an uptake of that science. There should be a consciousness of for an SNT that will serve the people. Okay, so for example, for us as scientists, we cannot just keep on staying in our laboratories or keep on staying in our field work. We have to translate these experiments, these knowledge systems that we are gaining in serving the masses. So I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so we will have a short break. Do we have an activity on our break? Sarah, or we can just perhaps we can do this, maybe answer some of the questions, ask our initial speakers, Kling and Chucky, some of the questions posted here, and then after this, I guess initial Q&A, we will have Jonah Yang as the last speaker. So we can. I'll read some of the questions. We have one question from Jay Pundavella. He asked, all right. Okay, Jay Pundavella asked, should Filipino scientists consider collaborating with Chinese scientists in the South China Sea? Klang and Chucky, would you like to pitch in with your answer?
I think it will depend on what is the research question, how the relationship between the two countries will actually impact the research. So I cannot just directly say that, yes, we have to, because they're scientists, we have to collaborate with them. So the question is, how will the Filipino people benefit from that, right? How will we know the history of power relationship, especially for example like with the US, how they actually control there are different cases of how another country or like the US controls the research and how the result actually will benefit them more than our country. So it's not a wholesale yes because they're scientists, right? We cannot just say yes because regardless of their nationality, they are scientists, so they will do good science. The good science will benefit the people, right? So if we cannot check that requirement that will benefit the masses, that will benefit the Filipino people, I think it will be hard to collaborate with whoever it's, regardless what nationality of the scientist or who are they working for. Okay, right. So I think that's my position for in that question.
Right, and perhaps you're right. It depends on the topic, and sometimes scientists, we resort to just collaborating with each other instead of relying on the institutions and other restrictions government wise. Second question, I guess this question was answered already by Kling. How are these STEM stats compared to the rest of ASEAN? Right, it was answered.
Yeah, hopefully
I think so.
with the data that was shown, but I think that's just a snapshot of how backward S&T in the Philippines is. So
right.
with that short data that was presented, it's just a snapshot of how backward. I think it is well represented by the carabao that is being used in agriculture. But But we should not be remiss that given the backwardness of S&T in the Philippines, we might be expecting that science and scientists are also backward. Okay, our scientists are talented. They can be the best in their field given the right technology, given the right support.
Right. There are more questions, and I'm just checking the time now, but for us to stay in our time limit, I guess we'll go to our last speaker now. We have Jonah Yang. Jonah is the current Secretary General of AGHAM. She earned her college degree in social forestry from University of the Philippines, also in Los Baños. Jonah works as a full-time activist. In addition to AGHAM, she's a printmaker with the organization Printmaking for the People. Jonah, take it away.
Ayan, magandang umaga. Mula sa Pilipinas, good morning from the Philippines. I'm Jonah, the Secretary General of AGHAM, Advocates of Science and Technology for the People. AGHAM is one of the conveners of the Science, Technology, and Engineering Agenda for the People. For a while, dami lang nakabukas sa screen, nakakalito. Ayan. So, earlier, my colleagues discussed the pandemic situation in the Philippines. Tapos ngayon, ano ba yung magagawa ng mga Filipino scientists doon sa paparating na national elections? So, yun. In our organizational effort to discuss, to advance the concerns not only of the S&T community but also of the majority of the Filipino people, AGHAM sees the opportunity to participate in the national elections by gathering professionals and organizations to craft an electoral agenda that will reflect the aspirations of the community. So STEAM PH, previously known as Scientists for Change, was formed in 2016 to push for the S&T agenda in time for the national elections. So it is a broad alliance of students, professionals, organizations from the S&T community, S&T community with the objectives of gathering and consolidating our concerns pertaining to the science, technology, and engineering community, at saka to advance our demands and calls through advocacy, campaigns, policy recommendations, and lobbying actions. And currently, the alliance is composed of individuals and organizations concerned with issues related to agricultural modernization, ICT, digital rights, engineering, environmental protection, public transportation, and S&T education, among others. Last year, the Alliance started to consult with the community to hear their insights on various societal issues. So to further expand the existing electoral agendas, the Alliance launched a series of open conversations. We call them brown bag sessions. Focus on agriculture modernization, national industrialization, or NI, education, the rights and welfare of S&T professionals. Narad was one of the participants in the said discussion. Environmental protection and public transportation, to name a few. So we also invite experts and advocates to share their analysis on the challenges and opportunities of the aforementioned concerns. Tapos, later tonight, actually, our fifth and last brown bag session will focus on public health access. Binanggit nga kanina ng mga kasama ko mula sa AGHAM. The pandemic has exposed our underfunded healthcare and the dismal response of the Duterte government. So yun, after the series of consultations, after all the brown bag sessions, once the electoral agenda is finalized, the Alliance plans to hold a press conference, ayan, and series of public discussions to popularize and gain support for the agenda. We will also engage with the national candidates by lobbying the agenda. Tsaka bahagi din ng lobbying effort ay to scrutinize the track record and current programs of the national candidate, of each presidential and senatorial candidate. Ayun. Tapos, siguro sa atin, kanina it was asked na what can Filipino scientists studying and working abroad, what can they do, di ba? What yun? So, Filipino scientists studying and working abroad can support the agenda by first, syempre, joining STEAM PH. At the same time, to echo the calls of the scientists, technologists, and engineers in the Philippines. Kasi giving support or support transcending international boundaries provides an additional dopamine boost for the scientists and advocates back home. Ayan. After all, our struggles in the Philippines, the government underfunding for S&T research, and the lack of job opportunities for scientists and engineers also resonate with our Filipino scientists abroad. Ayun, so yun po, ito po ay isang formal invitation for the association to be part of STEAM PH. Yan, so yun po, maikli lang. Maraming salamat at mabuhay po ang mga siyentista ng bayan. Thank you po.
Awesome. All right. So again, thank you, Kling. Thank you, Chucky. Thank you, Jonah. I will read some of the questions that were typed in our chat, and then I'll open it up to the group. Well, again, this is an informal discussion. So guys, if you want to say something, comments, suggestions, recommendations, or valid reactions, whatever you have, please feel free to raise your hand. So you have your reactions there at the bottom, and then there's an option to raise your hands. All right. So my question, may ilan pang question dito. Isa is yung statistics na 0.16% of GDP for R&D. What year was this, and how does it compare with other years po?
Hi, hello. It's according to the 2016 compendium of DOST of Science and Technology, blah, 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 I forgot. So actually, nag-increase naman siya. Let me see, I have the data here. Pero nag-increase siya in a very, very small from 0.013 if I'm not mistaken. Wait lang, babalikan ko kayo. Kasi hinahanap ko pa yung files. I closed it pala. I'll post it in the chat. Pero still yun nga, hindi siya talaga sobrang lumaki. Maliit lang yung difference niya with the previous years. Thank you.
That's good. And then Edna, Patricia Mendoza, Edna, feel free to also add on to this. Your question is, how do we operationalize what Chucky is saying about belief versus data? How do we operationalize pushing science into the beliefs of the Filipino people? It's a great question. So it's a question of science communication. For Kling, Chucky, or Sarah.
I think Lilia is raising her hand. They hands. If no one's responding yet, I can respond to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Chucky.
Yeah, so I did my master's on environmental education. So I look at more on cognitive processing, how that was 2014, before Cambridge Analytica was actually using our data, our cognitive processing in controlling in social engineering as. So actually, it's not about teaching science, it's actually about belief. So now, in addressing the question is, how will you formulate your science education touching on the cognitive processing of individuals? So we have these two cognitive processing, system 1, system 2. System 1 is like you're more intuitive. System 2 is you're more reflective. But all people have system 1 and system 2 cognitive processing. Now, the question is, how will you formulate your science, your education system, your whole education system in accessing these reflective system so that your citizens will be able to reflect on their actions, regardless if you're teaching science, you're teaching math, you're teaching history, you're teaching English. As long as it can access the cognitive processing tool of your students, it can lead to those actions. That's just one way of bridging that belief and gap. And of course, that's you have to go down to the ground, to the masses. You cannot just talk and talk on conferences in your classrooms. As long as you stay within the confines of your conferences, of your classrooms, and do not teach, go to the masses and then tell them that these are what are happening right now. So I think not you cannot address that problem.
Just an additional question, Shopee. Sorry if I may. Lahat naman tayo ito natatagalog, no? Gusto kong magsalita ng Tagalog kasi wala akong kasama rito maliban sa sarili ko at yung mga alaga kong daga. No? So gusto kong magtagalog. Chucky, tingin mo ba gaano natin katagal maaaring makita itong mga impact or yung epekto nito sinasabi ng mga cognitive processing natin? Totoo na maaari nating ayusin, no, yung ating edukasyon para ma-access itong mga cognitive processing na to, isasama natin sa pedagogy and malay mo, pasama rin natin sa andragogy for the adult learning. Pero bago natin makita ang mga consequences or yung impact nitong klase na to is gaano katagal?
Yeah, in terms of how fast, how slow, that I don't know. Pero ang question sa atin, I think yung important sa atin is the steps we are taking to start that conversation, to start that process of developing the reflections among our students, among the citizenry, right? So it might be a cop-out not to answer that na gaano kabilis or gaano katagal, pero I do not have the answer to that. Pero for me, the answer should be, for me, my answer is the steps we are doing so that we can achieve that. So ayun.
Awesome. And I'd like to also recognize Lilia. You're raising your hands, Lilia. I'll ask you to unmute.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for the presentation and letting me speak as well. So I think like what I was saying in the chat, like I know it's a little bit like a language barrier, but basically I think like the idea should not be like these people are uneducated and we need to like tell them what's what. Like I think the idea should more be like, how do we connect with our people? Like, how do we like talk to them in layman terms? Because academia is so inaccessible. And this is coming from someone who's gone through academia. And, you know, I think, and, you know, there's a really good conversation in the chat of this. I just wanted to like emphasize that like I think we like those in academia also need to like kind of switch our thinking of like we are not teachers, we're like also like we need to like bring ourselves down in the level, like same level, instead of thinking ourselves like higher and more like smart, because like it comes off like when I hear we need to educate the masses, we need to teach them, what I hear is these people are stupid and they need to like they need to understand what we know. And like I'm not speaking for everyone, I'm just speaking like that's how it comes off to me. And I know I have some other kasamas who feel the same way. So I just wanted to leave that there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great comment. Any comments from our speakers on that? No?
Maybe Jonah can share about her work with the Lumad School and San Roque. I think it will touch on what Lilia was saying regarding teaching with the masses, not teaching the masses.
So I understand Lilia's concern, no, that whenever that, for example, when we say that when we in the academic talk about going to the masses and telling them what to do, I think our experience in the Philippines is teachers from the academy, other volunteers from different industries or different institutions they volunteer for alternative school, for community, for alternative community schools. These schools, for example, are IP schools, LUMAD schools, and one is an alternative school for the urban poor. And or for the urban poor. So the collaboration is more in developing a pro-people, a mass-oriented, scientific, and a nationalist or patriotic curriculum so that the struggles faced by not only their sector, not only of the IPs, not only of the urban poor, but the struggles faced the struggles faced by the majority of the Filipino are being taught in the curriculum. So kumbaga parang, sorry, I cannot put it in English, no? Parang may equal footing o magkasama sa pagkatuto, kasama sa pagkatuto, kasama sa pagbubuo ng curriculum. Yung mga katutubo at yung mga urban poor, yung masa, yun. So, yun, ganun yung dynamic. So, yun, mas ganun siya. Yun.
Awesome. And then we also have, well, I think this was answered in chat already, but Elaine, she was asking where can we join or how can we join STEAM PH?
If you want to be part of STEAM PH, maybe you can send me your email address so I can give you, I can send you a formal invitation, and I can also send you the concept paper, and then we schedule a consultation meeting, an orientation for STEAM PH. Info. Thank you.
Awesome. Perhaps we can do an AFSA-wide orientation for STEAM PH. Okay. And then Sarah gave a comment there, lobbying, wondering what kind of lobbying we can do with US representatives, since the US also sends some aid budgeted for science-related policies.
Honestly, I cannot really give a definite answer on how will Filipino scientists in the US can lobby in the Senate or in the government. Maybe Chucky or Ate Kling can help me to answer. Sorry, kasi mas ang iniisip kong lobbying mas sa Philippines, pero outside. Or maybe, hindi ko sure. Or maybe individuals or Filipino scientists can work with the People's Organization, the Malay Movement, I guess, who has parang direct collaboration with the mass organizations in the Philippines. Parang ganun. Or maybe Chucky can add.
Just an experience here in UK with different progressive groups. I think in terms of science, we connect that to the bad science, the evil science of weapons. So how we can actually mobilize scientists, especially working with in terms of, let's say, defense weapons, etc., and all others discipline, actually in educating them, in rallying them to contact their MPs, MPs here in the UK. I think that can be, because I think the US is still the #1 country that supplies defense, what you call that, defense materials, technology, defense technology like surveillance, bombs, etc. So how can you actually, in terms of, let's say, if you're a physicist, if you're a computer engineer or computer scientist, how can you actually address these technology that actually do not serve the people, serve the imperialist interests of a country in, let's say, in surveilling, for example, our cases of red tagging, of how of different human rights violation that actually use this technology. I think that's the most the example that I can give.
Sure. And obviously, there are other ways where scientists can be involved in the policymaking process, right? By submitting position papers, op-eds, writing about it, blogging about it, like what everyone said here in the panel, communicating your science so that it reaches everyone. And then I saw Nared's hand raised up. Nared, please unmute yourself.
Hello, sorry, I was about to type in the chat. Anyway, I just wanted to respond to Sero's question on lobbying. I would suggest for those of you in the US or based in the US, you can look at how the National Science Foundation channel its funding. I've been a recipient of an NSF grant through, but it was the system is that USAID provides the cash through the National Science Foundation, and Filipino scientists can submit an application if they have a collaborator from a US-based scientist or professor. So we had a collaborator from the University of Miami. So he had a separate proposal, and then we wrote a separate proposal, and then it was a sort of collaboration. So I think that's a concrete way where you can lobby and ensure that review the process and first of all lobby for more funding to be channeled to Filipino scientists. So that's one, because the opportunities are very limited. Number two, you can look at how and where they are putting the money and how the research agenda is being shaped. Like, because from what I've seen through the years, the pattern is that these funding agencies like the USAID, for example, and European OSAID, JICA, and all of these aid funding agencies, they are the ones who dictate the research agenda, not the communities, not the scientists, not the actually I'm leaning more on the communities should be dictating the research agenda, not the scientists, not even the Filipino scientists, because Filipino scientists, a lot of them really are unaware of their biases and their colonial mentality as well. They're still. I'm not talking a lot of the scientists, especially those with access with these fundings. They're still wrapped in this colonial mindset of science. So if we can lobby that these money go directly to the communities and the communities dictate the research agenda, that would be a good first step, and maybe less money from USAID and more directly from direct funding. I think that's the first. That's just one off the top of my head that
Yeah,
maybe look at.
those are really interesting perspectives, and especially with with NSF now starting adding those broader impact statements from scientists and proposals, right? Hopefully, I'm not sure about USD and other grant giving bodies. If there's a broader impact statement, how does it affect community? I see Carla's hand raised up. Carla, please.
Can I add one quick? Sorry, just one quick, because in our past experience as well, a lot of the science that it's being done is lopsided to US-based scientists. So, for example, the biodiversity surveys conducted by the California Academy of Sciences. I mean, you guys probably know of this. There's a lot of papers that were produced, but a lot of these papers were first authored mainly by US-based scientists. There's also this collaboration by some California group with the CHED, funding projects here in the Philippines, but 100% of the patent or the intellectual property is owned by the US based scientists, not the Filipinos, not the workers who do the actual research. So these are some of the things that I suggest that you can look into. Sorry, thank you.
Good point. All right, Carla.
Yeah, just really following up on the some concrete steps that Filipino scientists abroad could really, do for the Filipino people, and also like for the science and technology. Because Narad also mentioned USAID. I guess it's not like trivial to everyone how like the US actually funds a lot of military operations in the Philippines. So it's really one concrete step for us is really to stop the military aid of the US to the Philippines. And we could do this by also endorsing the Philippine Human Rights Act. That is also endorsed by AFSA, or the Association of Filipino Scientists of America. So if you want to be involved with that lobbying, there's a lot of people in the Malaya movement in the room who could also provide more information, but you could visit humanrights.org.ph. Yeah, we can put it in the chat. But also, this is really important because like Filipino scientists themselves are really not excluded from the attacks of the state. What Kleng and Chucky have mentioned, there's really nationwide state repression, and the Philippines is one of the top deadliest country for environmental defenders, who are the scientists themselves, the indigenous people. So I think from us, if we really want to express our solidarity and really to show action for these cause, one thing that we could really concretely do is to support the Philippine Human Rights Act.
Awesome. Cool. I have a question for our panel. So I really like the point about cognitive processing and really connecting with, the Filipino people on our sciences, but there's also this issue on the cognitive capacity of everyone, not just Filipinos, at this moment where we're all experiencing shortages in our bandwidth because of COVID. A lot of the people are thinking about their economic situation and everything else. So ang bandwidth natin for talking about sciences is shortened, right? So, there's that balance between, should I talk about my science to these people when they don't really probably care about it, right? So I guess that's the question. I'm unsure how we can approach that.
Maybe I'll just share, and maybe John and Kleng will share their experience. I think for me, how do I address that personally is centering. So how do you actually center your science, and how do you actually make it work with the people? For example, for me, the research that I've been doing for my PhD is actually, the center is working with the indigenous people and making the science work for the people. So given that argument that our limited bandwidth that we have, there are hundreds of problems in the world. Magsa-science ka pa ba? Diba? Parang ganun yung question eh. So now the question, you can answer that with the science is part of the solution, right? So the vaccine hesitancy, if there is actually vaccine hesitancy, part of the science is part of the solution. Science is not just the solution, it's part of the solution. So now how are you going to center that in terms of, let's say, the dolomite situation in the Philippines, or how China is actually controlling the territory of the Philippines in terms of the West Philippine Sea or South China Sea, right? There's still science in that, but that's actually a problem of food security, scarcity in the future. Same with the Manila Bay rehabilitation in the country. So you can actually still put science. It might not be very technical, but as long as it will address the needs of the people, how will you actually work with the people, organize their thoughts? They're very scientific. Why?
Yeah.
Science is materialist. Okay, so science is actually anchored on a fundamental requirement, which is material, right? Science does not come from thin air and then you just pluck it and then, oh, there's science. It's science. There's science in hunger. There's science in human rights violation. There's science in all of this. It's just looking for that. How will you make science work for the people? I think.
Well said. Kleng, Jonah, do you want to add on that?
And I thank you. Thank you for that wonderful answer, Chucky. Actually, we have the same sentiment. In my experience, actually, what really helped is, I don't know with the current pandemic situation, but what really helped me is immersing with them, and then you'll realize you'll know their language and needs, and also their knowledge about it. And a lot of times I'm surprised because as part of the as part of Petty Bia, we studied a lot of things, for example, in forestry, about the scientific name of this, the family name, etc. And when I went to the indigenous people, they might not know the scientific name, but they recited all the medicinal properties of that particular plant, and how the fisher folk of Zambales can locate their fish traps in the ocean without needing what do you call that,
Any equipment.
an equipment, a gyroscope or whatever, just looking at the landscape of the mountains. So things like that, a lot of indigenous knowledge, local and indigenous knowledge systems and practices that might be different from the terminologies that we know from the mainstream science that we know, but they know a lot of things, and we can really merge those two. So I don't know if that answers the question, because maybe Chucky already answered most of it. Thank you.
Nice. There are really amazing comments in the chat. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand if you want to just share it with the group. There's a plug here by Julie. Julie, do you want to personally invite us to join the Malaya USA?
Hi, sure. I think that Carla already said it really well, but we know there is so much wealth here in the United States, and over 550 million of our US tax dollars have gone to the Philippine military and police for trainings, for weapons, not even factoring weapon sales, which is in the billions of US dollars at this point, when we know this could be better served going to more community resources, access to health, education, science for the people. So yeah, we invite all of the scientists here to support us in fighting for the passage of the Philippine Human Rights Act. And I think scientists can take a really specific angle in also demanding for more money towards research, towards science and technology for the people, and ending the COVID pandemic and making it accessible, services accessible to Filipinos on the ground. So yeah, please join us. AFSA is really wonderful and already has endorsed the PHRA, and we'd love to take more active steps and lobby with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. There's a question here from Edna. Edna, feel free to ask it also if you want, or I'll read it.
Okay. Thank you,
go
Cynthia.
ahead.
I can. All right. So thank you for unmuting me. No, ito talaga solid na tanong for those who are studying abroad. This is really solid because a lot of us are experiencing this. And when we study abroad, di ba, mapapaisip tayo, oh, dito na lang ako, or I can parang pwede kong palawigan yung aking research dito sa ibang bansa. Pero ang tanong talaga sa inyo, gusto niyo bang umuwi? Huwag na yung gusto eh. Uuwi ba kayo pagkatapos yung mag-aral sa ibang bansa? At manilbihan sa bayan, at itong mga pinag-uusapan natin dito na tungkol sa AGHAM, tutulungan ng ating inang bayan, ay ito ba talaga ay gusto niyong gawin at gusto niyong umuwi? Pwede naman din kasing hindi umuwi, di ba? Dito lang tayo, tapos like remote na lang, remote help, remote ayuda na bilang mga future scientists, di ba? Pero sino ba talaga dito yung uuwi? Maraming salamat.
Let's do that's a great question. Let's do raise hand reaction if you want to go home and give back to the Philippines.
Napakasaya naman. Okay.
I think the question is probably incomplete. You could go home, but go home for good or go home temporarily.
Yeah, but there's Balik Scientist program, right? There are.
And also we can,
siguro pwedeng both, no, Jay? Maganda na pwede kang umuwi momentarily, tapos doon ka magsaliksik, execute mo yung project doon, as long as meron kang maaaring makontribute na solid. And then sige, tsaka ka na mag-ibang bansa. And then, or pwede na namang magstay ka doon for good sa Pilipinas.
Oo, uwi
Tsaka,
ako kasi nakalimutan sapatos ko.
Nice.
I guess,
Well,
sorry.
go ahead, Carla.
I guess maganda, like the discussion from Kleng and Chucky is a really good like perspective on how to answer this. Kasi, like some people do decide not to go back to the country, but dahil yon sa iba't ibang factors. It's not because they don't really love their country, but it's more of, like there are situation in the Philippines that really forces everyone to leave and find better opportunities abroad. So may usapin pa talaga ng labor export policy and really national industrialization sa Pilipinas na kailangang i-resolve bago natin fully masagot yung tanong na yan.
pwede magdagdag.
Yes, go ahead, Chucky.
So on a government policy perspective, we can also look at how actually the government is pushing its scientists out. No, for example, I'm a teacher in a science high school in the Philippines. So before the K-12 education, it is not walang objective to parang push its scholars outside the country. Then later on, nagkaroon ng policy for mag-test ng SATs, etc. so that they can get their scholarship, etc. And then you push them out, you funded them their science scholarship throughout their high school. Then you push them out. Then you have a balik scientist policy program wherein you are again hinihikayat, no? You're pulling them into the country. But the problem is, again, same with what Carla was saying, there is no national industrialization. So you're pulling them into the country, but where will they go? So for example, as basic as the DOST scholars, should be, there should be a system wherein they will go directly to different industries. Let's say I'm an engineer. Why can't DPWH or Department of Public Works and Highways, I'm a civil engineer, why can't the department accept me, right? Or give me a job? Or the Department of Energy, why can't it give me a table wherein I can let's say work for 2 years and then learn from the engineers, right? And then and help the country. So ayun kailangan din natin siya tignan in a systematic system. Ano ba yung mga policies na nagtutulak palabas at paloob? I think a lot of Filipino people would like really to stay in the country. No, what's with our lumpia? No, you can taste lumpia in America, in UK, but the lumpia in the Philippines is better, right? Yun lang. Thank you.
Definitely. It seems like around that topic, we can have 2 hours more of discussion on, Philippines and the state of science in the Philippines, and also us scientists enriching our lives, enriching our experiences, going home and giving back, right? So hopefully, in the future we'll see that, but really we'll end on a positive note. We saw a lot of hands raised when Edna asked, really good question, are we going back? But I think really, given that we're all here, the Filipino scientists, Association of Filipino Scientists of America are here and listening to this talk, I think it's a good testament of really the interest on helping the Philippines on our small to bigger ways, right? So I guess last slide would be plugging AFSA. Carla or Sarah, do you guys want to do that? Also AGHAM, you feel free to plug more activities, and also STEM PH, STEAM PH.
Yes. If I can find the slide.
Yeah, I dropped some links in the chat. I think because of the healthy discussion, it was buried somewhere. But if you all want to check out AFSA, you could visit our Instagram. It's afsa.official. We also have Twitter, AFSA official. And if you want to join us yeah. Yes, Sarah managed to find it. Yeah, so follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. There's also a Slack workspace where we mainly communicate, so feel free to join there. There's also a membership form that I will put in the chat. But we were so glad that y'all were able to join us today. Sarah?
I don't really have too much to add, but thank you so much. Yeah, as one of the advocacy co-chairs, along with Cynthia of AFSA, we're definitely really glad that we got to kick off the year with such a really timely and really lively discussion.
Yeah. Again, we welcome you. We invite you to our AFSA Slack channel. There's our link tree there, tiny.cc/AFSA Slack. Join our Slack channel in the different Slack website and the different channels there. Just a plug for the advocacy committee of AFSA. We hold our committee meetings every fourth Tuesday of the month. Everyone's welcome, and obviously, yeah, please join us. Please be a member of AFSA.